I was over here. Maybe it's because the music is so loud. Playing some traditional German music here with Oktoberfest, partying it up with my beer over here. Now remember, the way that beer begins is not Oktoberfest. It goes back thousands of years. It goes back to ancient China, and you have a concoction known as mead, which is based actually out of honey, which does lead later to the origins of beer. Now, after that, though, when you have the introduction of barley, is in ancient Mesopotamia, and they added bread in there to add some yeast that gives that fermentation that we know of, right? Well, you know what's funny? I was just at lunch with a friend, and the guy had bread and beer for lunch. Literally had bread and beer for lunch. I was like, geez, what is this guy doing? Well, it turns out he's practicing an ancient Mesopotamian practice, and I had no idea. Now, in addition to that, what's really fascinating is over the ancient world, there's different ways that this starts to form, and it becomes very valued. Let me give you an example. In ancient Babylon, they would do rationing, and in ancient Egypt, rationing out beer, and the priests would actually get more than the workers, for example. So how do you like that? But in ancient Egypt, you would actually often get paid in beer. So let me give you a couple of examples of how I might pay. I got one here with bison on it since we're here in North Dakota. I thought that might be a fitting beer to pay you with, Sophia. And I got myself, I'm going to pay myself too, with a pink beer over here because it matches my bow tie. So I figured it would be nice and fashionable for me to get paid in this sort of beer. So it might have different kinds of flavors of beer that we're getting paid in. Now, what's really interesting though, is from the ancient world, they actually didn't flavor it the same way we might flavor it. Let me give you an example. Now, here's my beer. What they might put into it are things like olive oil. I got some right here. Let's try it out. Okay? They might also
I don't know about the olive oil in the beer.
I can hear you. So no, see, of course, that's when the sound comes in, is when you see the olive oil coming. That was too much, too risky. Now let's go ahead and add some spices. How about oregano?
Ooh.
And how about basil leaf? These are some of the things that they will be adding. Now this is starting to sound like pizza to me, right? With all the spices on it, because what else does pizza have? Cheese. They might put cheese into the beer. So we're going to do that over here as well. I got an entire plate full of cheese over here. You thought you were eating cheese with beer? No, they're putting it into the beer. Still sounds like pizza to me. Now, look, you have pizza. Now, I know some of you freaks out there put fruit on your pizza, like pineapple. I know because I'm one of those freaks myself. And they did that freaky stuff back then as well. They'd add dates and other kind of fruit. Now, I'm not going to put fruit in there for now. But you know what's really crazy? Adding vegetables to your pizza. So how about a plate of carrots? Something that was practiced in the ancient world. So let's put some carrots in here. And now let's see, cheers, how it tastes.
Oh my gosh, I don't know about all of this.
You know what it tastes like, Sophia? It tastes to me like beer and pizza. I got a lot of pizza ingredients in there and drinking beer with it. So maybe that's why beer and pizza go well together. We're kind of it's like a redo of the ancient recipe. Now, now all that wonderful knowledge goes into the Middle Ages over to monks, the religious folks. Who knew that we have to thank the Christian folks for giving us our alcohol? Church and alcohol, maybe not something I always think about associated, but hey, it was at this point, because think about the monks. The monks were using beer, were centers of knowledge for much education, including how to make the beer, brewing beer, and of course, as we know, some of the heavier beers for fasting to help them, hold their stomach. So in honor of that, the pint glass I brought here today has the St. Andrew's cross on there, and you can see it's from the St. George Brewery, St. George Tucker Brewery. I'm actually president of an organization called St. George Tucker Society. Believe it or not, you can check them out, St. George Tucker Society.org. It's a history organization, but here we're focusing on the Christian aspect of it, the origin of it. And so in honor of the monks, here is something that is, with their symbolism on it, right? But they didn't just maintain the knowledge. What they did is they changed the beer. You know this kind of clear and frothy and heady beer that we know about? That's the kind of stuff that they changed the texture of it, and they added hops. And I know a lot of people like hops in their beer today. And so we have the monks to thank for that. So you should be thankful with this hop trend of the last 15 years to go back hundreds of years. Now, as you move forward in Europe, you end up coming over to Oktoberfest that we know about. We think Oktoberfest is a long time ago. It actually is not as long ago as some of the stuff we talked about here today. It was only about 200 plus years ago that Oktoberfest began. And it began as a wedding between a prince and a princess. So a royal wedding is how it began. And all kinds of festivities took place. And one of the big events of it that is not really present today, horse racing. It was a big horse racing gathering and basically celebrating the wedding for a long time. Now that's the kind of wedding party that I want, is something like an Oktoberfest. Well, it was so fun with the races and the beer around it that over time what happened is it became a recurring annual tradition. And in that annual tradition, more and more beer was consumed. Today, for example, you have about 1 million or more than 1 million gallons of beer that are consumed at Oktoberfest. And that's where our story ties over to North Dakota, because it's in the 19th century that North Dakota starts to make beer prior to statehood in the 1870s when it was a territory right there in the capital today in Bismarck, when it became a booming frontier town with the railroad coming through. In the 19th century, you know where they got there was fierce competition. You know where they got some of their brewers? Of course, from Germany. These guys are being trained in Germany. Oktoberfest is going on. It's a beer mecca, a beer capital. And so in the fierce competition, in order to make beer locally, because Bismarck had hotels and drugstores and saloons and general stores, it's kind of all this sophistication. Instead of bringing the supplies in from the railroad, what you're going to have is cheaper to make the beer at home. And so there's competition among brewers. You know what happens to the two biggest competitors? Not so good. One goes bankrupt, the other one burns down. Pretty incredible. And then shortly after that, there's prohibition in North Dakota, because at the time that it applied to statehood in 1889, they applied as a dry state. So poor guys, the beer didn't last terribly long. It was like that for about a century until the 1990s. Not that it was prohibited until the 1990s, but you don't have microbreweries or breweries come back into the 1990s in proliferating the way that they have today. And so that impact of having that alcohol banned for a period of time did have an impact over the course of the century. And so starting in the 1990s, you have this kind of recovery, if you will, of microbreweries, which is actually in part attributable to all the home brewing that took place when the beer was not available, because people went over to Minnesota or Montana, or they maybe do a home brew of some sort. There are different ways that you accommodate, so you have your own recipes. So when the microbeer trend came in the 90s and 2000s, the local recipes were already there. They just started to brew them, and here you have, of course, one of the really strong areas for beer, I think. Anytime I'm in Fargo, I enjoy local beers all the time, and I think it's really fun to tie it together to that history. And it goes back to the European history that we're talking about. And look, I know this beer is a little bit funky, but there are some pretty freaky flavors out there in the microbeer world, don't you think? So I feel like, it's kind of in honor of that.
My jaw dropped when you put the carrots in there. That was the tipping point for me.
Well, you know what's even better? I got a whole Steiner mug, German style, with a ton of carrots over here. A second one I'm going to have right after we get off here.
You got to send me a picture as proof that you really finished that.
I will do that. I'll send you a photo and we'll show you the whole thing on the bottom. I put a whole bag of carrots in here in honor of the folks beforehand. So we got 2 of these here. And so, look, before we leave, let's just make sure that we celebrate Oktoberfest.
Yes, I love it. Thank you so much, Raffi, for joining us with the party. It's always a pleasure to have you. We really appreciate it. All right, everybody at home, stick around because the party's not stopping. We have your daily dose of motivation right after this break.